Hello, welcome, and thank you for taking part in the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library Sight and Sound Video History Project. I'm Tom Walton. Today we're talking to someone who truly needs no introduction, but she's going to get one anyway. She is Toledo's veteran member of Congress, Marcy Kaptur. And when I say veteran, I mean it. Her first race for public office was also her first race for Congress, and she won in 1982. Voters in Ohio's 9th Congressional District have been sending her back to Washington ever since. She's in her 14th term, and she is the senior female member of the United States Congress. And Representative Kaptur, thanks for the time. I'm looking forward to our conversation very much.
Thank you. I'm really going to enjoy it as well.
You were born in Toledo in 1946 to Polish parents. Your father, Stephen, your mother, Anastasia, known as Sherry. Can you talk about your mom and dad as we begin?
Oh my gosh, I could spend my whole hour talking about them. Mom and Dad were the children of immigrants, so they were actually born in our area, in Toledo, and no one could have had better parents. I'm sure that other families, other children feel that way, but both my brother and I were really blessed with just beautiful, beautiful parents.
Now, your father was a produce dealer for many years, and then later operated Supreme Grocery, what's it called?
Yeah, Supreme
Superior.
Market.
Okay.
Supreme Market. It was a tiny little family grocery, but it was Supreme.
In Rossford, is that right?
Yes, in Rossford.
Did you ever work in the store?
Oh, absolutely.
What were your duties?
Everything. Cash register, stocking the shelves, cleaning the meat blocks, sweeping the floor, helping Dad and our uncle make sausage, helping Mom make pies. It was great. We went everywhere. My brother and I would bounce along in Dad's little pickup, and we'd go downtown, and we would go into the Swift and Armor in downtown Toledo, where they had the meats, and we would go into Creasy, and we would go buy all the tomatoes at the tomato house, and oh, there's just so many stories. I remember the first tarantula I saw at the banana house when we were down in the basement. We grew up with our parents. We were always with them. I'm
sure I would remember my first tarantula too. Your mother, Anastasia, was very active in early efforts to organize auto workers at Champion Spark Plug.
Yes.
Did her experiences help mold your attitudes about labor?
Yes, they really did. Our mother, both our parents were very intelligent, and they lived at a time when they were never able to go on and to obtain their high school or college degrees. And so life was hard. And Mom struggled from the time she was 13. She would take buses across town to clean people's houses. It was the Depression. And she was the sole support of her family. And there were many siblings. Her parents were immigrants. And so the first really good job she ever had was at then Champion Spark Plug. And they organized a union there. Our shy mother to be on an organizing committee is, you wouldn't believe it. But it was so that someone who worked hard wouldn't be kicked out just because the nephew of the owner wanted to put his relative on the job. So
that was a totally different era in organized labor, wasn't it? Much more roughhouse, a lot of violence here and there, so it was a tough time.
It was a tough time. People, she organized for very what seems like simple things now, bathroom breaks, and if someone wanted to get married, that they would be able to do that and not lose their job. Maybe take a day to get married. You know, things that seem so matter of fact now, but then nothing was guaranteed.
Somebody had to fight for them.
Piecework, rewarding production, and getting paid for that. Mom really, and to get rid of nepotism. I think that was really one of the major reasons that she fought so hard. And then Dad was always an independent truck driver and produce man. I just have to say this because he was the bravest and courageous. He was only 5'9", 5'10", and he was so strong. And he delivered his produce in Chicago in a time when the mob controlled the docks, and he used to carry a sawed-off shotgun in the back of his truck.
Oh my goodness.
And our father, as an independent trucker, unloaded his produce on the docks of Chicago during the 1930s, and he came back alive. A funny story, they used to pick up chickens or eggs. They were going to bring back eggs to Toledo, and it got real hot as they were driving through Indiana, and all the eggs hatched. So they came back to Toledo with chickens. But they were just great. It was growing up like that. It was just we knew both city and country. Dad was close to the farmers, and we actually, I grew up in Adams Township. Mom and Dad grew up in Toledo, but I grew up, and once they got married and they moved out to Reynolds Corners, that's where my brother and I grew up.
How did your mom get her nickname, Sherry?
That came from her brother, Anthony, whose name was Tony, and they each gave one another nicknames when they were children. And so that's what happened. It sort of stuck. But it was a good name for her because she was a cherry.
Now you mentioned you had your sibling, one brother,
one
right,
brother.
Stephen?
Yes.
Okay, what can you tell us about Steve?
Steve, he's my best friend. He is such a gentleman. And he and I are in totally different walks of life. He was always a heavy-duty automotive mechanic, a race car driver, an inventor, and worked too hard and hurt his back, and has managed to remain productive in doing other things now. But his first love is invention. He has a patent, and he is, if I can properly describe it, he has replaced the camshaft of an internal combustion engine with an infinitely variable system that injects air and fuel. This is where his mind is.
Wow. I wish he could come by my place and kind of work on my car.
He can repair anything.
Wow.
He can fix anything. Anything.
Now, you were best friends now. Was there a sibling rivalry, though, when you were growing up?
You know what? There never was. I wanted
is he
a
older
sibling.
Or younger?
He is younger.
Okay.
So he's about 7 years younger.
You kind of felt a certain responsibility for him.
Yeah, I'm the big sister.
Yeah. Can you talk about the neighborhood where you grew up, Reynolds Corners area, West Toledo?
The best place to live. We were right near the truck gardens, all of the greenhouse industry. For a while, Dad had worked at a little fruit stand up on Reynolds Road and Airport Highway, Hill Avenue, in that area. It's still the truck garden capital and greenhouse capital of the whole Midwest. And we were a part of knowing the farmers. His brother, Martin, his oldest brother, in Dad's family there were 16 children. Dad was the youngest, his brother Martin was the oldest, and they used to have a place they called the Dugout. When I was first campaigning, it was over on Hill Avenue. This was during the speakeasy times, and people used to go there to dance and to drink, right? And then one time it blew up because they had all that alcohol over there. And these people were characters. I mean, every one of them. It was just fun to be with them. And Dad's brothers would always have, like, the first car, first Model T or something, they would be in it. And they'd be driving it around. One time they were driving around Parkside Boulevard, and they didn't know how to stop it. And so they had to wait till it ran out of gas. I mean, there were all these things that happened, you know, and as kids we would laugh and we would just enjoy being with them.
Now, I think you've already answered this, but trips to downtown Toledo were a big deal when you were a kid, weren't they?
Oh, they were a big deal. We would wait on the corner of Dorr Street and Reynolds Road, and this big bus would come. It wasn't the regular Greyhound bus. It was a bus that came from further out in the country, and it had very, very comfortable seats. And it would take us into downtown Toledo. And then we would go shopping. We'd go to Morrow's Nut House. You could smell the smell of the nuts coming onto the street. And then you'd go down to Titke's, and oh my gosh, that was just a whole morning.
The big cheese wheel?
Oh, the big cheese wheel, all the candies, all the coffee, the donuts back there. I remember after I graduated from college and I got my first job, and I said to our grandmother, I said, "Grandmother, I want to take you to Titke's and I want to buy you anything you want," you know. And what did she want? She wanted a hat. She wanted a hat from the second floor.
Did you buy her a hat?
Absolutely.
Good for you. You were named Marcia Carolyn Kaptur when you were born. At what point did Marcia become Marcy?
Sometime between grade school and high school, I guess. Sometime in there. Dad picked the name Marcia because it didn't rhyme with anything. He didn't want any name that would rhyme with anything. And then Carolyn came from our grandmother and her mother. So that's where the name came from.
Now you start your school, talking about your school years, Little Flower? Is
Little
that
Flower.
Where you began?
Franciscan
those years
sisters. Do I every year. In fact, one of our sisters, our 7th grade teacher, Sister Norbertine, is about to celebrate her jubilee out at Lourdes College, Sisters of St. Francis, in a few weeks. And I've remained close to those sisters. They are each precious, and they gave themselves to others. And this family is grateful for that.
Now, you went from Little Flower on to St. Ursula
To St.
Academy?
Ursula, yes.
Those had to be exciting years, too, as you grew up.
Yes, the first person to ever go to high school from our closest relations. So that was, imagine that. And it was with the Ursuline sisters and on Indian Road. They had built a new school on Indian Road. It was the closest one to where we lived, so we went there. And it was a wonderful, wonderful education. And then you on a college projectile from there.
Well, can you talk about the St. Ursula, the life's lessons, perhaps, that you learned there, strong moral values, work ethic, all of that, which is in evidence for you still today?
Yes, I think the work ethic goes way back to the family. But I think at St. Ursula, the world was open to college. That actually started about the 7th grade with the Franciscan sisters and then the Ursuline sisters, because they had Mary Mance here in those days. The idea of women, and I'd never really thought about this until I was elected to Congress, but most of the women who were elected to Congress in the era I was elected had gone to women's schools. In my case, it was high school. For some of the other women I served with, it was college. But there was no limit. And I think that had tremendous influence and a very freeing influence. And as a individual from the Roman Catholic denomination, I will also say that it was those women, religious, who created the role of the independent woman. A lot of people think, oh, that came from the feminist movements, and that came from Gloria Steinem, or, and so forth. No, if you really look back, the tradition of independent womanhood began with the sisters over 400 years ago.
Now, speaking of St. Ursula, your high school yearbook says that you were in the drama club and that you were in the senior class play. Did you enjoy acting?
I enjoyed everything. I liked acting. I liked.
Do you remember what the play was?
Oh goodness, Life with Father at St. Francis. I was a maid, I think. I was a maid. Father Denny directed the play that year. We had such a good time. All I remember is laughing. And in grade school, I remember laughing in Girl Scouts, and in high school, I remember laughing. It was just. They were just very good years.
You never considered a career as an actress?
I could never imagine being in a play and saying the same thing over and over and over 1,000 times. I don't know, that isn't who I am.
Well, let me ask you, what were your career aspirations when you were a student at St. Ursula?
At that time, I think just going to college, learning. I loved learning. And I didn't really know exactly. John Kennedy, during the years we were in high school, had been assassinated. That had a profound impact on me. And when I went to college, I remember that President Kennedy had majored in history. And so I went to the University of Wisconsin. I received a scholarship to go there. And I thought maybe I might want to major in history. But I was in a program where in your first 2 years, you take all your requirements, and I was so drawn to the sciences that I've considered very much becoming a heart surgeon, believe it or not. And I love botany, I loved life sciences, and the hardest decision I had to make was, would I go the arts or the sciences, and I chose history, poli-sci, economics, languages, and I went that route. But it was a really hard decision. So I don't think I was sure, but I was looking. And then that was the era of civil rights. Our campus, the Vietnam War, our campus was in turmoil. I was sitting in a class one day at the top of Bascom Hill in Madison, and we were tear gassed out of our classrooms. And the anti-war demonstrations were on campus. The physics building was blown up. I don't know if you remember that era or not, but Wisconsin was a hotbed of political activity during those years. So all of those things were happening, you know, and you're very young. You're not even 21 yet.
Well, you had a strong Catholic upbringing. Did you ever consider becoming a nun?
You know, I think I was pushed in that direction a little bit because our father's oldest sister was a Felician Franciscan, and I just didn't feel that it was for me because of the I remember one summer, Sister Cleofa, our aunt, was trying to teach me to do hairpin lace, and I wanted to go out with my softball team, you know, and I didn't think maybe I had quite the discipline that was necessary in order to do that. But there's no question that the Franciscan charism is deeply ingrained in me.
What was your first job?
My first job was babysitting, and then I didn't really care for that. I didn't really like that. And so my first job was working for the Toledo Lucas County Library. Then it was called the Lucas County Library out in the Reynolds Corners area. I loved that. I just loved it.
How fitting, all these years later, we're talking about the Sight and Sound project of the library.
Of the library.
Yeah.
It is one of the finest library systems in the world. And the people that I met back then, I can give you the names: Dorothy Strauss, Phyllis Shear, Helen Perkins. I still remember Lillian Fennell. I still receive cards from her. She lives here in Ohio, and I was a page, and I loved it.
Do you remember that first paycheck?
I probably remember it, but I don't remember how much it was, but it was like $30.
Whatever it was, it had to be a thrill.
It was a thrill, because I went to work. I worked all through high school in order to try to earn money for college.
Now, you mentioned you did your undergraduate studies at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And you got a scholarship, that had to be a factor, but why go away to school? Why not University of Toledo, Bowling Green?
Right, because as a page in the Toledo Lucas County Library system, I used to read all the books about how colleges were rated. And I mentioned I was interested in history, and that was among the top 10 in the country. And just like our father owned the supreme market, and he wanted to have quality, and he did in everything he did, I wanted quality education in the field I thought I might major in, and I went to the University of Wisconsin.
Okay. Now, you were not only the first member of your family to go to high school, I believe you were the first member of your family to go on to college. Isn't that
true.
right?
That's true.
What did that mean to you personally, knowing how hard your father and your mother worked?
Oh, there's no way to describe it. There is no way to describe it. People who have not had to struggle and who've just sort of been privileged can't imagine how far that leap is. To come from very humble beginnings and to be afforded the opportunity in this country to advance your education and to develop your talents with no limit. America truly is the land of opportunity if you avail yourself of that. Is it easy? No, it isn't easy at all. Particularly when you come from the lower middle class or the working class.
Ultimately, I guess you decided to take your career in the direction of urban planning.
Yes.
How did that happen? What attracted you to that field?
It's a good question. In college, I was taking many courses in urban history. I mentioned I was a history major. Intellectual history was actually my major. And but I thought, you know, how am I going to make this practical? How will I make this practical? And during that time, of course, America's cities were burning down. Dr. Martin Luther King had been assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Yeah. It was an unbelievable time in our country, and I thought, that's something I can do, because I'd been studying urban politics. I thought, I can help America rebuild her cities. I can really do this. And so while I was a senior, our class traveled all over to America's burned out cities. We went to New York City, Newark, New Jersey. We saw a part of America that was deeply troubled, and I think partly my Catholic upbringing, partly my education, and partly being a very practical person, I thought, this is where it all comes together. And then I came back home to Toledo, and I went to work for the Toledo Lucas County Plan Commission, and that began my career as a city planner.
What is wrong with America's cities today as you examine that?
Well, I think our cities, that takes an hour right there to answer your question. But economically, the cities have to redefine themselves. Because what made America great in the 20th century is not necessarily what will be great in the 21st century. And we have a lot of old baggage. And I think one of the efforts that I was involved in as a planner is to attract wealth to the areas where your unemployment is the highest, and to try to create enterprise locally. And I think what's happened all across America is that investment has come from elsewhere, and people have forgotten that when the Constitution was written, the concept of the patent and invention and creation was fundamental to who we are as a people. Here in the greater Toledo area, we have to remember who we are, the abundant region in which we live, astride the largest river that flows into the Great Lakes, and think hard about that ecosystem and what it affords us as we look forward to the future. One of the projects we were just involved in this morning is bringing agriculture back into the city with new technology, and not doling out, not giving away our food dollar. 98% of what we eat is not grown here. That's crazy in the most abundant place on the earth, really. So we have to think hard about that sector. We have to think hard about the energy sector, how we produce our energy, how we bring it closer to home, how we capture the wealth that comes with that. The same is true in clothing. Everything that we wear now comes from somewhere else. Yeah. We have to recapture those dollars, and then we have to advance our native industries, adding to them new technology. Example, solar, where we're now one of the 3 leaders in the hemisphere, building on our glass and silicate heritage. So we have to remember who we are, and we can't live in the past. And we have to remember invention, creation, imagination. Those are at the basis of who we are as a people, but certainly who we must be as a region.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit, obviously, about your political career, and I wanted to ask you, when did that political bug first bite? Do you remember?
Oh, it was...
Weren't you active in the Lucas County Democratic Party as
a child?
As a child.
I remember going up to Judge Devine, he's now retired officially, to his home in the Old West End and asking, hello, I'm Marcy Kaptur, I'm a volunteer from the Democratic Party, can I register you to vote? And he laughed at me. He said, don't you know who I am? I said, no. He said, I'm Judge Devine. I said, oh, okay. Anybody else live in the house that isn't registered, you know? But I started out as a youngster.
How old were you at that time?
Oh my gosh.
12, 13, something like that?
I think I was very young. And people say, well, why are you so political? If you are Polish American, you must know your history and the history of the struggle for freedom. And that was embedded in us as children. It came with the package. When you were born into the Kaptur-Rogowski family, it wasn't pounded into you, but you learned through your relatives what had happened to your ancestors, and it was a part of who you are. Our mother used to have an expression, our children know the history. They know the history.
Yeah, remembering the tough times in Poland and the generations before you. But you also were on student council, were you not, at St. Ursula?
Yes, I got elected to that.
Did you win on a landslide?
Oh, boy, I
have to ask because most of your elections end on a landslide.
Oh, I know. You know, I just enjoyed it. I didn't really, and I still have that trouble in Congress till today, you know. Like we have certain members, generally the men who like sports, they can remember scores. They can remember, you know, that vote was 218 to whatever, right? They'll remember the score. They might not remember what the vote was about, but they remember the score. I'm more of a person, I'm less interested in the vote and more interested in the concept, more interested in pushing the idea forward and using whatever opportunity you have in order to do that. So I don't remember what the vote was on student council.
I'm sure you enjoyed it, though. But talking about pushing the idea forward, you later worked in the Carter administration as a domestic policy advisor to the president. What was that like? What was it like working for Jimmy Carter?
Right. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for someone who had come from where I have come from. But what happened was that my work as a city planner had taken me all around the country. I got my master's degree from the University of Michigan in that field. And then I began to work for a great organization in Washington, the National Center for Urban Ethnic Affairs, that sent me all over the country, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Providence, and Chicago. And ultimately the work I did in Chicago was written up by Loyola University, a man named Ed Marciniak, who's no longer living. It was called Reviving an Inner City Community, and it was about my work in Chicago. And it was that book that was given to the newly elected president and his domestic affairs advisor. And they decided to bring in this woman from the Midwest to join the urban team. I was one of 3 that worked in the Carter White House and advised him in the area of cities.
Now, after Jimmy Carter left the White House, you have to start thinking about your political career. And can you tell us about your first run for Congress back in 1982? What circumstances got you into that race?
Well, I had gone on after the Carter years to work on my doctorate at MIT in the field of urban planning and development. And I wanted to work in Capital Short communities. That's what I wanted to do. And it was a dream of a lifetime. I was 36 years old or whatever it was. I came home at Thanksgiving and the unemployment rate was horrible. And that settled with me, you know. And then I went back between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I came home at Christmas time, and a couple of my friends here, political friends, Peter Uvagi, Al Baldwin, Jim Ruvalo, they said, have you thought about running for Congress? And I laughed. I laughed at them. And what actually happened was that I went to the store with my mom, and I met a woman who's no longer living, but she was working at one of these supermarkets behind the meat counter. And I said, hey, how you doing? Because she was one of the kids I knew from grade school that we always had such a good time together. She used to have those big hoop skirts and she'd twirl around, you know. And her name was Bernie, and she started to cry. I said, what's wrong? And she said, my husband's lost his job. I must care for my grandchildren. I've gotten this job, Marcy, it's really tough. It was that moment that I have to say was the pivotal moment that really made me think about what my political friends had been saying to me. Because I was having a great time at MIT. I was whizzing through, I was about to write my dissertation, and I would have been a teacher and an activist.
So this wasn't part of some grand plan. There really was a magical moment where you decided, yes, this is something I have to do.
It was not a grand plan. A lot of people, all these Washington pundits say, oh, she worked in the Carter White House, and they say in my little bio in Washington, you know, that she decided to run for Congress. Not true. Because why would I have gone to MIT? Why would I have packed up all my belongings, hauled them up in a U-Haul, and gone up there? And I drove back. By the way, when I finally made the decision to withdraw that semester and come back home, which was a major lifetime decision because I never finished that PhD, I drove 17 hours in a U-Haul with a 65-mile-an-hour regulator through the blowing snowstorms through Buffalo and Cleveland. I thought, if I can do this, I can do anything. And so I drove home and I ran for office.
Now, how much of that had to do with the fact that Lud Ashley, veteran Democratic congressman, had been defeated by Ed Weber? Weber, it was believed, would be vulnerable as a one-term freshman Republican legislator. Was that a factor in your thinking? You think, maybe I can do this?
Well, what I thought was, at the time, with all due respect to Ed Weber, who's a very good citizen and a good community-minded man and family man, good father, good husband, I thought, I will give him the race of his life. And I never really thought, because I knew this community. I'd worked here for almost a decade. I'd lived here my whole life, really, other than going away and working at the White House or going to school. This was my community. And I thought, I will be a voice, because I know what it's like to be unemployed. I remember Dad, after he had to sell his store, and he had his heart attack. He had 2 heart attacks. And I remember what it was like to live in a family that got an unemployment check, and how tenuous everything was. Everything was tenuous. Nothing was certain. Life wasn't certain. Right. Next week wasn't certain. Health insurance wasn't certain. Nothing was certain. And I thought, I can be a voice for families because I understand this. And what happened was we went on to win that election. We were outspent 3-1.
Well, let's talk about election night, 1982.
Oh, yeah.
You defeated a one-term Republican. You're going to Washington. What were your emotions that night?
Oh, it was unbelievable. I remember we rode into the United Building Trades Hall that was up on Lewis Avenue, and our campaign manager, Russ Wozniak, who just happens to be the husband of our county commission leader, Tina Skeldon Wozniak, and we drove in, and you know, there are all these muscular men from all the building trades standing there, right? And we come in this little car, and Russ said, "My gosh, they're going to lift the car right up," you know. And then we walked in the hall, and my dear friend Ray Zwire, his wife, they were from Monclova Township, and the CBS Evening News was there from the National. They'd brought their crews in to this district because it was the upset of that year. No one believed, I mean, no one in Washington believed that some woman from the Midwest, who wasn't a Washington fixture, would be elected. And so, who is she? What happened out there in Ohio? And when I arrived in Congress, remember, there were only 24 women in those days. So it was pretty unusual.
Your mother was there to share that wonderful moment with you?
Oh yes, my mother,
It
my
must have
brother.
meant something to her.
Oh yeah, just tears.
As we mentioned when we started talking, Marcy, you are the senior female member of Congress. Did you expect back on that night in 1982 that we'd be sitting here in 2009 and you're still there? Did you expect to be in Congress that long?
No, I didn't. All I know, I didn't expect to be there. Once I was elected, it was the first time in my life that I didn't have a next step. I liked what I was doing. I felt all my talents were fully engaged. Usually I would say to myself, okay, so 5 years I want to be here, 5 years I want to be here, 5 years, you know, I would know where I wanted. When I was elected there, despite the difficulty, it was like I was in my milieu. I had found that place. And I loved serving people. And it wasn't, we have never had an easy year. What I've come to understand, the district that I represent versus some of my colleagues, we have no cushions. We don't have a big defense base. We're not a capital city. We're not a financial or trading center in the sense that New York or Chicago or San Francisco are. We're not a port city quite like Los Angeles or Oakland. I mean, think about Elizabeth, New Jersey. And we're out here in the middle of the Midwest, and we have to create our wealth. Nobody's going to give us anything. We have to literally grow it or build it from the bottom up. And my colleagues don't get it. They really, some of them are totally spoiled. One man in Virginia, he always disagrees with me. His district, the government, is his major employer. He cannot understand the struggles. And I beat him up all the time, verbally at least. I say, you know, you've got to understand a different part of America. You know, we help pay for you, and you don't understand that. Or the finance centers, like New York, look what they've done to us now. You know, they trade in our wealth, but they don't create it. They just move it around. And so I've come to understand how difficult it is to represent a district like this. We don't get those big agricultural subsidies. Those go to Iowa. Those go to Nebraska. Our farmers don't take them. I mean, we have unsubsidized agriculture for the most part in this region. Yeah, we got some corn subsidies coming in and soybean. But when you look at our region, we have had to sail our boat in a very rough economy for a very long time. I look at some of my colleagues and I just, we come from different places.
Your name has often been floated over the years in connection with other public offices, Governor of Ohio, U.S. Senator from Ohio. In 1996, I think it was, Ross Perot asked you, wanted you for his running mate, but you declined. What has stopped you from accepting that opportunity, not just that one, but others that if they've come along to serve on a grander scale?
Right. I sometimes wonder what a grander scale really is. because I feel as though, as one of 535, all right, I have a continuing voice, and I know that anything important takes a long time to build. Whether it's the World War II Memorial, which took us nearly 2 decades, it took perseverance. If it is our solar energy work here in this region and renewable energy work, 2 decades of effort, constantly pushing the research. A president lasts 8 years, maybe 4. Same thing with a governor. I value my community roots because I think it keeps me true to a certain direction. In other words, the people, after you're in elected office, as long as I've been, they surround you. Their experiences permeate you. And you're better able to capture the fullness of that. That sounds so strange, doesn't it? Like, you would know it automatically when you're elected. But for example, this is just one example. We've been working so hard to help meet the needs of needy people here during this terrible recession. And in the food sector, the needs of our food banks are up 47%. And I have been racking my brain, because there's all these federal subsidies that come in here. I'm thinking, wait a minute, it's all backwards. This isn't the way you really meet the needs of hungry people is you begin to produce here again. Washington thinks that the answer is you just send in more food stamps, right? Yeah, that's one solution. But the real solution is to make an abundant area more productive. And so now I'm going down that path. And I think I've got a real clear vision. And it took me a long time. Same thing with our greenhouse industry. We are one of the nation's leaders. Nobody knew that. We've been working at the task of helping to advance that industry as part of our economic bedrock here. So the longer you're in office, the more the people inform you. And I can also tell you this, when I was first elected, it takes 10 years for people to trust you. 10 years. You say, well, you got elected. Well, yeah, but you can see it in their face. You can see it in their face. And then after maybe more years, then they really tell you what's on their mind. And that is a very, very, talk about the word awesome. That is an awesome experience for someone to tell you what is really in their hearts.
Well, it sounds like you've had to choose between staying where you are and wielding broad influence and bring your experience in Congress to bear, and maybe forfeiting that and looking at a broader office. And is there any way that you could see yourself running for the U.S. Senate, for example, George Voinovich's seat? What would have to happen?
I could see myself running for that, but those offices are all a money chase. Mm-hmm. And the truth is that right now, I believe I can do more. I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee, which is a struggle in itself to get on that. And I've learned that I can change America through what I can create in my district. For example, with our Senior Farmers Market Coupon Program, which we test-bedded here, we've now taken that to America. It's part of the new Farm Bill. If I look at the solar energy research we're doing here, I believe that this district, we are going to repower America through what we invent and create here. We're going to take that to America from here. If you look at the work that we are doing in strategic metals, whether it's beryllium, magnesium, all of the titanium, the work that we are investing in here in terms of what we give to our industry and to our defense, that will be done here. So it's a different way of thinking about the office that you see if it really works here, and then you take it to the country. And I've become enchanted with that idea because for me, I know what it takes to run for governor or for Senate. And you know what? I don't want to spend all my time raising those dollars. If I win the lottery, I'd consider it. But right now, I know that I can do what I think is a pretty credible job from here. And I think what we learn here, we can inform the nation. I think also when someone like myself takes on Wall Street, investment houses, and really makes them feel the heat. I don't see many senators doing that.
Yeah.
I don't see many governors doing that. So I use my power to the fullest.
A lot of it comes down to fundraising, doesn't it? You find that something that is not very pleasant.
It's not.
You have to raise an awful lot of money from an awful lot of people, and then come the special interest charges and all that stuff.
That's right.
That's something you'd rather avoid.
It is horrible. It is totally compromising. I don't care what any elected official says. For a president to have to raise $700 million, that's nearly $1 billion. Who are you in hock to? For Senate in Ohio, depending on the opponent, $20 million. Governor, how many millions? 8 million? 12 million? What if you have a really... Where are you supposed to get that money? Where are you supposed to get it? Oh, Marcy, there's small donations. Try it. I've tried it. The most important step we could take at the national level, which neither political party will do, is to have caps on spending and make time available on the airwaves free as a condition of FCC licensing. That's what we need to do.
This gets back to your thought about seeing things through to their finish. You mentioned the Washington Veterans Memorial in Washington, World War II.
Yes.
You introduced legislation repeatedly. It took several years before that finally was signed into law,
Yes.
I believe by President Clinton.
It was by 2 presidents.
And you spoke at the dedication in 2004. That has to be a special moment for you. Why that close ties to the veterans?
Why the close tie to the veterans? I think first family, and then my academic training, understanding the role of a civilian-controlled military in our country. We come from a family of Marines and Army, all of whom were wounded. Mm-hmm. Having to deal with wounded veterans in your own family. We had an uncle, his children and grandchildren live in this community, and great-grandchildren. Uncle Tony Anthony Rogowski, who was in the OSS during World War II, which was the precursor to the CIA. Do you know how good he had to be? How good he had to be to do that. I mean, in his valor. Mm-hmm. And what he taught me as a child, he should have more than one Purple Heart. And they never awarded him any. Mm-hmm. Because the OSS was in a special classification. I'm working on that. But anyway, my joy for the World War II Memorial comes from going down there and just watching the families. And you see, you said, which president signed it? We had President Bush the first, President Clinton, and then we had the second President Bush, and they didn't draw the legislation. They didn't go get the co-sponsors. That was done in the Congress. Mm-hmm. That was done by a member of the House with the help of all the veterans groups in the country. So I feel we made a difference for America from an idea that was born here through Roger Durbin, veteran Army, who was a letter carrier in Berkey, Ohio, his whole life. His son and family, grandchildren live here. That was an idea, again, that came from here, and we fought for all those years. You can't imagine the struggle we had, and then we did it. And we did it for the country. So I don't feel unsatisfied as a member of the House. I am not an unsatisfied member.
Marcy, you have a strong blue-collar background. Much of your congressional district is blue-collar. Do you despair for what's happening to manufacturing in general and the auto industry in particular?
Oh, it weighs on me very heavily, and I have tried for so many years to change the trade laws, the tax laws of our country, to change the policies that have led us to this point. That's when it gets frustrating being a member of the House, when you're just one voice. We have changed the debate We've gotten the term trade into national debates, fair trade, trade on a level playing field. Even the language is so difficult to change. Tax policy, the value-added tax, which makes a German car coming over, gives it a 19% advantage over ours. Japanese market closed largely to the rest of the world. Dealing with these trade issues, that's the only temptation I have in terms of some other office where you could deal with those global issues. But I know how big a fight this really is, the globalization fight. And the way I look at it historically is, when our country was founded, sadly, it was founded with great ideals rooted in a slave system of labor. It took us a century to try to remove that, and then another century to try to deal with the aftermath, right? Very ugly economic system.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the 1930s, through people like our mother, that labor had some platform, legal platform in this country. Today, what's happening is, rather than moving the workers here, what's happening is corporations are moving the factories to third world environments.
You were a very vocal opponent of NAFTA.
Yes.
Have your worst fears been realized?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was one of the fights I didn't win, and I'm still fighting. I know how high the hill is that we have to climb. But I'm grateful to be a part of the debate, and I know we've had an influence on it.
I read that after the NAFTA fight was lost, you were really down. You said you felt like a boxer who's getting pummeled in the ring and you don't know if it's worth getting up off the mat. In fact, at one point you considered resigning from Congress. Can you talk about that briefly?
I knew what would happen. I knew what would happen to people, to the kind of people that I came from, and that's exactly what's happened, both here and in Mexico. On the rural side in Mexico, over 3 million families, people have been uprooted as a result of NAFTA. They're just like our grandparents were in Greater Poland when the collectivization started, and they were told, you can't graze your cow here anymore. The ejido system uprooted the farmers of Mexico with no cushion. And here in our country, company after company after company has gone down to that low-wage environment in a very hierarchically controlled country. And so you see the casualties and you couldn't stop it. That breaks your heart. It breaks your heart every time you meet these families here and there. And you can't, the economic system is ugly, the nature of this relationship, and it has to be made just. And that is the fight that I am still in. It is one of the toughest, but you know what? It's sort of the modern day Mason-Dixon line has been drawn on the continent, and we have to repair that for the sake of the continent.
Marcy, I'm very aware of your schedule, and we need to let you be on your way, but I want to ask one last question for you. And one day you will leave public life, and as we sit here in the spring of 2009, we assume that day is a long ways off, but when that time comes, how would you like your career in public service to be remembered? Someday, 50 years from now, people are speaking of Marcy Kaptur. What would you like them to say?
Oh gosh, that she was honest, that she tried as hard as she could, that she was innovative, that she was a thinker, and that she was a patriot. A Democrat with a small d.
That would be quite a legacy. Marcy, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Once again, we thank our special guest in the Sight and Sound Video History Project, Representative Marcy Kaptur. We hope you'll be back with us next time.